He failed to save Orochimaru. He failed to save Nagato. He never married Tsunade. He never became Hokage. Yet, he succeeded where it mattered most. For most of his life, Jiraiya believed his story was shaped by the people he could not save and the dreams he never reached. He watched his closest friend fall into darkness. He saw one student become consumed by pain. He loved a woman he never truly stood beside. And even though he became one of the greatest shinobi in history, the title he once dreamed of most was never his. But history would remember Jiraiya differently. Not as a failure, not as a fool, not simply as the loud, reckless, wandering toad sage, but as one of the most important teachers the ninja world ever knew. Because Jiraiya's greatest power was never just his strength. It was his ability to believe in the next generation, even after the world gave him every reason to stop believing. His life became tied to a mysterious prophecy. One of his students would one day bring great change to the world. That student might lead humanity toward peace, or drag it deeper into destruction. For years, Jiraiya searched for the answer. Was it Minato, the brilliant young shinobi who became the fourth Hokage? Was it Nagato, the gentle orphan with the legendary Rinnegan? Or was it Naruto, the lonely boy named after the hero of Jiraiya's own book? The truth was more complicated and far more powerful than Jiraiya ever realized. Tonight, we follow the complete life of Jiraiya the Gallant, from a clumsy young ninja who refused to give up, to a legendary warrior shaped by war, to a teacher whose students would change the fate of the world. This is a story of friendship, regret, prophecy, sacrifice, and hope. A story about a man who believed he had failed, only to leave behind the very dream that saved the future. Long before he became known across the ninja world as the legendary Toad Sage, before the prophecy, before the students who would change history, before his final battle beneath the endless rain, there was simply a young shinobi named Jiraiya. Little is known about Jiraiya's family or the earliest years of his childhood. His story truly begins in the Hidden Leaf Village, where he grew up as a loud, clumsy, ambitious boy who desperately wanted to prove he was more than everyone expected. He was not born a prodigy. He was not the calm genius everyone admired. He was not the strongest child in his class. In fact, Jiraiya often seemed like the opposite. His techniques failed. His timing was terrible. His confidence was usually much bigger than his actual skill. More than once, he embarrassed himself in front of his classmates and teachers, landing flat on his back while others tried not to laugh. But Jiraiya had something that could not be measured by a single test. He refused to stay down. Every failure became another reason to try again. Every mistake became another story. Every humiliation became fuel for the loud, stubborn dream growing inside him. He wanted to become great. Not ordinary, not forgotten. Great. At that age, most people probably would have laughed at him. Jiraiya did not look like a future legend. He looked like a boy trying too hard, talking too loudly, and chasing a dream far too big for someone who could barely keep up. But that was the beginning of what made him special. Jiraiya's greatest strength was never perfection. It was persistence. He could fail 10 times and still return for the 11th attempt with the same ridiculous grin on his face. He could be mocked, corrected, knocked down, and embarrassed, but something inside him always pushed him forward. That spirit eventually caught the attention of one of the greatest shinobi in the village, Hiruzen Sarutobi. Hiruzen saw what others might have missed. Beneath the jokes, the mistakes, and the reckless confidence, there was a boy with an unusual kind of heart. Jiraiya might not have been the most talented student, but he possessed a will that refused to break. And under Hiruzen's guidance, Jiraiya would soon be placed beside two other young shinobi whose names would one day become legendary. Orochimaru, Tsunade. One was a quiet genius with eyes that seemed to study everything. One was a powerful young girl born from one of the greatest bloodlines in the Hidden Leaf. And then there was Jiraiya, the loud one, the clumsy one, the one nobody expected to stand beside them as an equal. Yet fate had already begun moving. Together, these three children would grow into warriors feared across every nation. Their friendship would survive training, war, heartbreak, and betrayal. Their lives would become tangled so deeply that even decades later, each of them would carry the others like scars. But before Jiraiya became a legend, before he became a teacher, before he became the man who shaped the future, he was simply a boy who refused to believe that failure was the end of his story. Jiraiya's life changed when he was placed on a team under Hiruzen Sarutobi. Hiruzen was already one of the Hidden Leaf's greatest shinobi, a man known for wisdom, discipline, and an almost unmatched understanding of ninjutsu. To many, he was a symbol of what a ninja should become. To Jiraiya, at first, he was simply the teacher who kept watching him fail. Again, and again, and again. Jiraiya's new teammates made those failures even harder to ignore. The first was Orochimaru. Quiet, brilliant, and unsettlingly calm, Orochimaru seemed to understand lessons before they were fully explained. While other children struggled with basic techniques, he absorbed knowledge like someone starving for it. He rarely wasted words. He rarely showed fear. Even as a child, his eyes carried a strange distance, as though he was always studying the world from somewhere slightly outside it. There was greatness in him. Everyone could see that. But there was also something lonely, something difficult to reach. The other member of the team was Tsunade, granddaughter of the first Hokage. She carried a powerful legacy, but she was not defined only by her bloodline. Tsunade was confident, fierce, stubborn, and naturally gifted. She hated losing, hated weakness, and hated being underestimated. Even as a young girl, she possessed the kind of strength that made people move carefully around her. Then there was Jiraiya. Loud, clumsy, overconfident, usually wrong. Whenever Hiruzen demonstrated a technique, Orochimaru learned it quickly. Tsunade attacked the lesson with raw confidence until she forced it to work. Jiraiya, more often than not, made a mistake large enough for everyone to notice. He slipped, misfired, tripped, shouted too soon, celebrated too early, and sometimes ended the lesson lying on his back, staring up at the sky while Tsunade rolled her eyes and Orochimaru quietly judged him. But every time Jiraiya stood back up. That was what Hiruzen noticed. Not genius, not perfect control, not natural talent. Persistence. Jiraiya could be embarrassed, corrected, mocked, and knocked down, but something inside him refused to accept that failure was final. If he lacked talent, he would train harder. If he was laughed at, he would laugh louder. If he fell behind, he would keep running until he caught up. Slowly, the team began to take shape. At first, they did not fit together easily. Jiraiya rushed into things without thinking. Tsunade grew frustrated when others slowed her down. Orochimaru preferred solving problems alone. Their early missions were messy, full of arguments, mistakes, and moments where Hiruzen probably wondered if this team would ever learn how to cooperate. But little by little, something changed. Jiraiya's reckless courage began to inspire the others during difficult missions. Tsunade's strength gave the team a center, someone who could hold the line when things became dangerous. Orochimaru's intelligence gave them strategy, precision, and a frightening ability to adapt. Together, they became more than three talented children. They became teammates. Then friends. Not simple friends, not peaceful friends. They argued constantly. Jiraiya tried to impress Tsunade more times than anyone could count, usually with terrible results. He would boast, pose, attempt something dramatic, and a moment later find himself launched across the training ground by one of her punches. Tsunade called him an idiot. Jiraiya called it progress. Orochimaru watched them both with quiet amusement, though he rarely admitted he found any of it funny. Those days were some of the lightest of Jiraiya's life. Before war hardened them. Before grief changed Tsunade. Before obsession swallowed Orochimaru. Before Jiraiya learned how painful it could be to love people he could not save. Back then, they were only children under one teacher, chasing strength without understanding what strength would one day cost them. Hiruzen saw something different in each of them. In Tsunade, he saw power and compassion. In Orochimaru, he saw genius and danger. In Jiraiya, he saw a stubborn heart that might one day become stronger than talent itself. None of them knew that these three students would one day be known across every nation. None of them knew their friendship would become one of the most famous and tragic bonds in the shinobi world. And none of them knew that the loudest, clumsiest boy on the team would eventually become the teacher whose students shaped the future. As Jiraiya grew older, his life began to move in directions he could never have imagined. Training under Hiruzen had already changed him. Every mission, every mistake, and every painful lesson forced him to become stronger. But even as he improved, Jiraiya still felt the distance between himself and his teammates. Orochimaru learned almost effortlessly. Tsunade possessed terrifying strength and natural skill. Jiraiya had to claw his way forward through failure after failure. Still, he kept going. That stubbornness would eventually lead him somewhere few humans had ever seen. Mount Myoboku, the sacred home of the toads. Hidden far from ordinary paths, Mount Myoboku was not simply a place one could visit by accident during an afternoon walk. It was a mysterious land, connected to ancient summoning contracts, natural energy, and powers most shinobi would never fully understand. For Jiraiya, arriving there changed everything. The mountain was unlike the hidden leaf in every possible way. Enormous mushrooms rose into the sky. Strange rivers wound through the landscape. The air itself felt different, filled with a quiet energy that seemed older than any village or nation. And everywhere, there were toads. Not ordinary toads, massive, intelligent, powerful beings who spoke, trained, argued, smoked pipes, carried weapons, and looked upon the loud young shinobi with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Jiraiya had entered a world far greater than himself. At first, the toads did not treat him like a legend, because he wasn't one yet. They saw his flaws immediately. He was impatient, reckless, dramatic, too quick to act and too slow to think. Training there was unlike anything he had experienced in the Hidden Leaf. Strength alone meant very little. To learn from the toads, Jiraiya needed patience, balance, discipline, and a willingness to listen. Naturally, he struggled. He failed exercises that looked simple. He lost his temper. He embarrassed himself. He was thrown, corrected, scolded, and humbled more times than he could count. But just as he had done since childhood, Jiraiya kept standing back up. That was what the toads began to respect. Not his talent, his persistence. Among the toads, one of the most important figures in Jiraiya's life would become Gamabunta, a massive and prideful chief toad with little patience for foolish humans. Their relationship was not built quickly. Gamabunta was stubborn, powerful, and not easily impressed. Unfortunately for him, Jiraiya was also stubborn. Again and again, Jiraiya returned. Again and again, he tried to earn the respect of Mount Myoboku. Slowly, the bond between the loud young shinobi and the great toads began to grow. But Mount Myoboku gave Jiraiya more than powerful allies. It gave him a destiny. The great toad sage, an ancient being whose vision stretched far beyond ordinary understanding, eventually spoke to Jiraiya about the future. His words were not simple instructions. They were mysterious, heavy, and difficult to fully understand. Jiraiya would travel the world. He would write books. He would train students. And one of those students would bring great change to the ninja world. That student could guide the world toward peace or toward destruction. The prophecy did not name the child. It did not explain when Jiraiya would meet them. It did not tell him how to recognize them. It only placed a question at the center of his life. Somewhere in the world, there would be a student whose choices could change everything. From that moment on, Jiraiya was no longer simply chasing strength. He was searching for meaning. Every road he traveled, every student he taught, and every war he survived would be haunted by the same possibility. Was this the one? Was this the child? Was this the person who would finally break the cycle of hatred or deepen it forever? Jiraiya did not know the answer, but the prophecy became part of him, a dream, a burden, a mystery. And as his life continued, that mystery would lead him to Minato, to Nagato, and eventually to Naruto Uzumaki. 3 students, 3 possibilities, 3 different reflections of the future he spent his entire life trying to understand. The peaceful years of training under Hiruzen could not last forever. As Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru grew older, the tension between nations began to sharpen. What had once been rumors and border disputes eventually erupted into open conflict. Armies moved, villages prepared. Shinobi who had once trained for the possibility of war now found themselves standing inside it. The Second Great Ninja War had begun. For Team Hiruzen, the world changed almost overnight. The training grounds of the Hidden Leaf were replaced by ruined roads, burned villages, and battlefields where every mistake carried a cost. There were no instructors to stop a fight before someone was seriously hurt, no safe boundaries, no second chances guaranteed by a teacher's watchful eye. War revealed the truth of the shinobi world. Children became soldiers, friends became casualties. Victories often felt almost as painful as defeat. Jiraiya entered the war still carrying pieces of the loud, reckless boy he had once been. He wanted to prove himself. He wanted to stand beside Orochimaru and Tsunade as an equal. He wanted the world to know he was more than the clumsy student who had always lagged behind. But war had a cruel way of changing what people wanted. The first time Jiraiya saw a fellow leaf shinobi die in front of him, something inside him shifted. The battlefield did not pause. The enemy did not wait. The mission continued. But Jiraiya remembered the face. He remembered how quickly a person could become a memory. That night, while the camp slept uneasily around him, Hiruzen quietly sat beside his student. "A good shinobi never forgets the weight of a life lost," he told him. "The day death becomes easy is the day you must start fearing what you are becoming." Jiraiya carried those words for the rest of his life. As the war continued, Each member of Team Hiruzen grew stronger in different ways. Tsunade became one of the greatest medical ninja the world had ever seen. While others focused only on defeating enemies, she fought to keep people alive. Her hands became a shield against death itself, and countless shinobi survived because she refused to give up on them. Orochimaru's brilliance became terrifying on the battlefield. He studied enemy techniques with unsettling calm. He adapted quickly, struck precisely, and seemed almost impossible to surprise. Commanders praised his mind, but Jiraiya sometimes caught something in his friend's expression that troubled him. Orochimaru did not seem horrified by death anymore. He seemed curious. Jiraiya grew in a different way. He was still not the natural genius Orochimaru was. He did not possess Tsunade's monstrous strength or healing talent, but he learned through pain, persistence, and experience. Every wound taught him something. Every failed strategy sharpened him. Every impossible mission forced him to become more adaptable. The toads of Mount Myoboku fought beside him, turning the tide of battles that might otherwise have ended in disaster. Enemy shinobi began whispering about the wild, white-haired leaf ninja who summoned giant toads and refused to fall no matter how badly the battle turned against him. His name began to spread. But the moment that would truly define the three teammates came in the Land of Rain. There, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru came face to face with Hanzo of the Salamander. Hanzo was not simply another enemy commander. He was a legend in his own right. A warrior so feared that entire groups of shinobi hesitated to challenge him. His skill, poison, and experience made him one of the most dangerous fighters alive. When the three leaf shinobi stood before him, they were not facing someone they were expected to defeat. They were facing someone they were expected to die against. The battle was brutal. Jiraiya pushed himself past exhaustion. Tsunade fought with every ounce of strength and skill she possessed. Orochimaru unleashed techniques that showed just how frightening his genius had become. Still, Hanzo remained overwhelming. He outmatched them. He forced them to the edge. He proved why the entire ninja world feared his name. And yet, they survived. That was what impressed him. Not that they defeated him. They did not. But that three young shinobi could stand against him, endure his power, and still remain alive when the battle ended. Hanzo looked upon them and acknowledged their strength. From that day forward, he declared that Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru would be known as the Sannin of the Hidden Leaf. The title spread across the world. The Legendary Sannin. To others, it sounded glorious. To Jiraiya, it carried a heavier meaning. The name had been born on a battlefield soaked in suffering. It came not from triumph, but survival. It was a reminder that even legends were created in places where ordinary people lost everything. For years, Jiraiya had dreamed of becoming famous. Now that the world finally knew his name, he found himself staring across the ruins of the Land of Rain and wondering why fame felt so empty. The war had given him a title, but it had also shown him the cost of a world built on endless revenge. After the Second Great Ninja War, Jiraiya returned to the Hidden Leaf, carrying both fame and uncertainty. The world now knew him as one of the legendary Sannin, but the title felt heavier than he expected. It had not been born from victory alone. It had been born from survival, from blood, and from standing on a battlefield where countless others never rose again. For the first time, Jiraiya began to understand that becoming strong was not enough. Strength could win battles. It could protect a village. It could earn a name that spread across nations. But strength alone could not answer the question that war had carved into his heart. Why did people keep doing this to one another? It was around this period of his life that teaching began to take on a deeper meaning. Among the young shinobi he trained in the Hidden Leaf, one student stood out almost immediately: Minato Namikaze. Minato was everything Jiraiya had not been as a child. Calm, focused, humble, and naturally brilliant, he learned with a quiet grace that made even difficult techniques seem simple. But what impressed Jiraiya most was not Minato's talent. It was his heart. Minato did not seek strength to dominate others. He wanted to protect. He listened when people spoke. He cared about his comrades. He thought carefully before acting. Even as a young shinobi, he carried the spirit of someone who might one day become more than a great warrior. He might become a great leader. Jiraiya did not know if Minato was connected to the great Toad Sage's prophecy, but he could not help wondering. A student who might change the world. A student who might lead others toward peace. At the time, Minato seemed like a beautiful possibility. But Jiraiya's path was never simple. The war had ended, yet the damage it left behind still covered the world like ash. And soon, his journey would lead him away from the Hidden Leaf and back into the land of rain, where 3 children waited among the ruins of a conflict they had never asked for. Yahiko, Konan, Nagato. They had already lost their parents to the war. Their homes were gone. Their childhood had been swallowed by violence before they were old enough to understand the politics behind it. For a while, they had only one another, and a small dog named Chibi. Chibi was more than a pet to them. In a world that had taken everything else, he was a tiny piece of warmth, loyalty, and normal life. He followed them through the rain, stayed beside them when they were hungry, and gave the children something to love when love itself had become dangerous. Then even Chibi was taken from them. During the chaos of battle, when powerful shinobi clashed and the land around them became another battlefield, the little dog was killed in the crossfire. To the great nations, it meant nothing. One small life lost among thousands. But to Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato, it was everything. It was the final proof that war did not only kill soldiers, it killed innocence. Not long after, the 3 children crossed paths with the legendary Sannin. They stepped out from the rain like ghosts. Their clothes were torn. Their bodies were thin. Their eyes carried the kind of exhaustion no child should ever know. Yahiko stood in front of the others, trying to look brave even though fear trembled through him. He had bright orange hair and a fierce spirit that refused to bow, even after everything the world had done to him. Konan remained close beside him, quiet and watchful. Her blue hair was folded carefully with a paper flower, a small sign of beauty surviving in a place that had forgotten how to be gentle. Nagato stood slightly behind them, silent and fragile, his long red hair hiding much of his face. The 3 children did not ask for pity. They asked to be trained. Orochimaru looked at them with cold practicality. The world was full of orphans now. The war had created more suffering than any one person could ever repair. From his point of view, taking responsibility for 3 children in enemy territory was not mercy. It was a burden. Tsunade was more conflicted. Her heart ached for them, but she also understood the cruelty of the world they lived in. Food, shelter, training, protection. None of it was simple. Helping them for one day was easy. Staying long enough to change their lives was something else entirely. Jiraiya said nothing at first. He looked at the children. Then he looked at the rain falling around them. He thought of all the battles he had survived, all the enemies he had faced, all the praise that came with being called legendary. And suddenly, none of it felt important. What good was strength if it could not protect children like these? What good was fame if it left the helpless behind? Without another word, Jiraiya began preparing food. The children stared at him cautiously, as if kindness itself had become suspicious. When he finally handed them something warm to eat, they hesitated before accepting it. Then, hunger won. They ate quickly, desperately, as though afraid the meal might vanish if they slowed down. Jiraiya watched them in silence. For the first time since the war had begun, he felt as though he was doing something that actually mattered. That night, as the rain tapped softly against the broken shelter around them, Jiraiya made his decision. He would not leave. Orochimaru thought it was foolish. Tsunade understood, even if she knew it would hurt him. But Jiraiya had already chosen. For a while, he would remain in the land of rain. He would teach them how to defend themselves, how to survive, how to protect one another. And perhaps, if he was lucky, he could teach them something even greater. That the world did not have to stay cruel forever. Jiraiya did not stay in the land of rain for a few days. He stayed for 3 years. At first, even he wasn't sure exactly what he was doing. He had survived wars, fought legendary shinobi, and earned a name known across every nation. But teaching 3 hungry, traumatized children how to rebuild their lives was different from anything he had faced before. Before they could become shinobi, they had to learn how to live without fear controlling every breath. Their shelter was small and worn down by the endless rain. Some nights, water slipped through cracks in the roof. Some mornings, food was uncertain. But little by little, Jiraiya created structure where there had only been survival. They trained, they cooked, they repaired what they could. They argued, they laughed. For the first time in years, Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato were not simply running from death. They were growing. Yahiko threw himself into every lesson with fierce determination. He was impatient, bold, and impossibly stubborn. When he failed, he became frustrated, but he never backed away from the challenge. He dreamed loudly, spoke passionately, and believed with his entire heart that the world could be changed. Konan learned with quiet precision. She observed before she acted, rarely wasting movement or words. There was a calmness in her that Jiraiya deeply admired. But beneath that calm was a loyalty stronger than steel. Once she loved someone, she would stand beside them no matter how dangerous the road became. Nagato was the most fragile of the 3. He carried his pain silently, as though speaking too much might cause everything inside him to break. At first, he lacked confidence. His movements were hesitant, his voice was soft. Whenever he made a mistake, he blamed himself immediately. But Jiraiya saw something in him. Not only power, kindness. Nagato hated violence. He hated seeing people suffer. He had every reason to become cruel, and yet there remained inside him a deep desire to protect others from the pain he had known. Then, one day, during a moment of danger, Nagato's hidden power awakened. The air changed around him. His chakra surged with a force that made even Jiraiya stop in place. And when Nagato looked up, Jiraiya saw the eyes that would haunt his thoughts for the rest of his life. The Rinnegan. Eyes spoken of in ancient legends. Eyes said to belong to the Sage of Six Paths himself. For a moment, Jiraiya could hardly breathe. He had heard stories of this power, but stories were supposed to remain stories. They were supposed to belong to myth, to ancient history, to a time long before the world he knew. And yet, those eyes were here. Inside a quiet, wounded boy who only wanted his friends to live. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Jiraiya sat outside beneath the falling rain and thought back to Mount Myoboku. He remembered the great toad sage, the prophecy, the words that had followed him across battlefields and borders. One of his students would one day bring great change to the world. That student could guide the world toward peace or toward destruction. Jiraiya did not know what to believe, but for the first time, he wondered if Nagato might be the child the prophecy had spoken of. Not because of the Rinnegan alone. Power by itself had never impressed Jiraiya as much as people thought. What moved him was Nagato's heart. Here was a boy who had lost everything, yet still wanted others to be spared from suffering. If someone like that could grow strong enough to change the world, perhaps the endless cycle of hatred truly could be broken. From that day forward, Jiraiya trained them with even greater care. He taught them ninjutsu, strategy, teamwork, and survival. But more than any technique, he tried to teach them the lesson he believed mattered most. Do not answer hatred with hatred. Do not let pain decide who you become. And never forget that peace is impossible if people stop trying to understand one another. The 3 years passed faster than Jiraiya expected. The frightened children he had once fed in the rain became capable young shinobi. Yahiko's confidence inspired others. Konan's calm presence held the group together. Nagato's power continued to grow, but so did his compassion. Together, they began to dream of changing the land of rain. Not through conquest, not through revenge, but by creating a world where children would no longer be crushed beneath the ambitions of powerful nations. When the time finally came for Jiraiya to leave, the goodbye was harder than he had imagined. The rain fell softly that morning. Yahiko tried to appear confident, but his eyes gave him away. Konan said little, though her silence carried more emotion than words could have. Nagato bowed his head and promised he would not let his sensei down. Jiraiya smiled for them, even though his heart felt heavy. "You don't need me anymore," he told them. "You have each other." He wanted to believe those words were enough. As he walked away from the land of rain, Jiraiya looked back one final time and saw his 3 students standing together beneath the gray sky. For the first time in years, he felt something dangerously close to peace. He believed he had planted hope in a wounded land. He believed those children might grow into the answer the world had been waiting for. He had no way of knowing that the same world that created their pain was already preparing to steal their dream. After leaving the land of rain, Jiraiya carried more than memories of Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato. He carried their words. Of the 3, Nagato had always been the quietest, but when he did speak, his thoughts often stayed with Jiraiya long after the conversation ended. Nagato had known hunger, fear, grief, and war. Yet somewhere inside him remained the belief that people could one day understand each other. That belief moved Jiraiya deeply. During his travels, he began writing a story inspired by that hope. It was not one of his later comedy novels. It was something more sincere. A tale about a shinobi who never gave up, no matter how cruel the world became. A hero who believed that pain did not have to create more pain. A hero who kept moving forward, even when peace seemed impossible. Jiraiya called the book The Tale of the Utterly Gutsy Shinobi. And the hero of that story was named Naruto. In many ways, the book became a small piece of everything Jiraiya wanted to believe. It carried Nagato's dream, Jiraiya's hope, and the possibility that one stubborn person might someday help break the cycle of hatred. At the time, the book did not become famous. Most people barely noticed it. But Jiraiya did not write it for fame. He wrote it because, for a brief moment, 3 children in the rain had made him believe the world could still be saved. Meanwhile, rumors from the land of rain began reaching him. At first, they made him proud. A group of young shinobi had begun speaking about peace. They wanted to end the violence that had turned their country into a battlefield for greater nations. They wanted ordinary people to have a voice. They wanted the land of rain to stand on its own, without being crushed between stronger powers. Their leader's name was Yahiko. When Jiraiya first heard it, he smiled. Of course it was Yahiko. The boy had always spoken as if the future would eventually surrender to his determination. Jiraiya imagined him standing before frightened villagers, giving them courage with the same fiery confidence he had once shown during training. Then he heard another name. Akatsuki. At the time, it was not yet the nightmare the world would later fear. It began as a movement built from hope. A group of people trying to create peace without surrendering to the hatred that had destroyed their childhoods. For Jiraiya, the news felt like proof that his students had remembered his lessons. But hope can be dangerous in a world ruled by fear. The more Yahiko's group grew, the more powerful men began to notice. Hanzo of the Salamanders still ruled the hidden rain. Once, even the Sannin had barely survived against him. He was powerful, feared, and deeply unwilling to lose control over his village. At first, Hanzo seemed interested in working with Akatsuki. But beneath the surface, fear was growing. Yahiko inspired people. Nagato possessed terrifying power. Konan was fiercely loyal. Together, they represented something Hanzo could not easily control. And in the shadows, another man saw the situation as an opportunity. Danzo of the Hidden Leaf. A man who believed peace was often secured through ruthless decisions no one else had the stomach to make. To him, idealism was dangerous. Movements like Akatsuki were not dreams to be nurtured. They were threats to be manipulated or destroyed. Jiraiya did not know all of this at the time. That was what made the news so devastating when it finally reached him. Yahiko was dead. The words felt impossible. For a long time, Jiraiya simply stared at the report, as though reading it again might change what it said. The bright-eyed boy who had promised to change the world was gone. The child who had survived hunger, war, and grief had been crushed by the same kind of political betrayal Jiraiya had spent his life trying to understand. Only later would the truth become clearer. Hanzo, fearing Akatsuki's growing influence, conspired with Danzo and set a trap. Konan was taken hostage. Nagato was forced into an impossible choice. Yahiko, refusing to let his friend become a murderer and refusing to let Konan die because of him, chose death himself. He threw himself onto Nagato's kunai. In that moment, the dream Jiraiya had helped nurture was torn apart. Yahiko died. Konan's loyalty hardened. Nagato's grief became something far more dangerous. The boy Jiraiya had once believed might save the world was pushed beyond the edge of despair. When Jiraiya heard that Nagato and Konan had vanished afterward, the wound deepened. No one seemed to know where they had gone. Some believed Nagato had died. Others whispered that something terrible had awakened in the land of rain. Jiraiya wanted to go back. Every instinct told him to return immediately, to search the ruins, to find whatever remained of the children he had loved. But the ninja world never stopped moving. Konoha still needed him. Threats still rose in distant lands. Wars ended, but the machinery that created them continued turning. So Jiraiya carried another regret. He had stayed with the children for 3 years. He had taught them, fed them, protected them, believed in them. And still, the world had found a way to reach them after he left. One rainy evening, sitting alone with an unfinished manuscript beside him, Jiraiya found himself staring at a blank page. He thought of Yahiko's smile, Konan's paper flowers, Nagato's quiet promise that he would not let him down. Then he whispered into the silence, "Maybe I was the one who let you down." For the first time since hearing the prophecy, Jiraiya began to fear that he had misunderstood everything. Perhaps the child destined to change the world had not been saved by his guidance. Perhaps that child had been broken by a world Jiraiya was never strong enough to fix. Yahiko's death left Jiraiya with a wound that never fully healed. For years, he had carried the hope that his students in the Land of Rain might one day change the world. When that hope collapsed, he threw himself deeper into missions, travel, intelligence work, and writing. If he could not fix what had happened to Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato, then perhaps he could at least prevent more tragedies from unfolding elsewhere. But while Jiraiya looked outward toward the broken world, another tragedy was growing much closer to home. Orochimaru had always been different. Even as a child, he saw the world from a distance. He asked questions other people avoided. He studied life, death, and the limits of the human body with a calmness that sometimes unsettled even those who loved him. When they were young, Jiraiya had admired him. Orochimaru was brilliant, focused, fearless. The kind of genius everyone expected to become great. But after years of war, that brilliance began to change shape. The questions grew darker. Why did people have to die? Why should knowledge disappear with the body? Why accept the limits of one lifetime when there were countless jutsu to learn and endless mysteries to uncover? At first, Jiraiya tried to laugh it off. That was what he always did when something frightened him. He made jokes. He changed the subject. He told himself Orochimaru was simply thinking too deeply, the way geniuses often did. But the signs were there. Orochimaru withdrew from others. He became secretive. His eyes lingered too long on forbidden techniques, rare abilities, and the bodies of shinobi whose powers fascinated him. Jiraiya noticed. He just did not understand the danger quickly enough. Then, rumors began spreading through the hidden leaf. People had gone missing. Not enemies, not nameless strangers from distant lands. People connected to the village. At first, the reports were confusing. There was no clear pattern, no obvious culprit, no single piece of evidence strong enough to explain what was happening. But eventually, the truth emerged. Hidden laboratories, forbidden experiments, human test subjects, the pursuit of immortality. The name at the center of it all was one Jiraiya did not want to believe: Orochimaru. When the truth reached him, Jiraiya felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Not him. Not the boy who had trained beside him. Not the teammate who had fought with him through war. Not the friend who had stood beside him before Hanzo and survived. But the evidence was undeniable. Orochimaru had crossed a line from which there could be no easy return. Hiruzen was devastated. To the village, he was the third Hokage, a leader, a protector, a man expected to make impossible decisions with clarity and strength. But Orochimaru was not only a criminal to him. He was his student, a child he had trained, a genius he had once believed might inherit the future of the Hidden Leaf. When Hiruzen confronted Orochimaru, the pain of that bond became a weakness. He could not bring himself to kill the boy he had once raised as a shinobi. That hesitation allowed Orochimaru to escape, and when Orochimaru fled the village, Jiraiya followed. He chased him not as an enemy, but as a friend desperate to stop another person he loved from disappearing into darkness. When he finally caught up to Orochimaru, the confrontation was not only physical, it was personal. Jiraiya demanded that he return. He pleaded, argued, tried to reach the part of Orochimaru that had once been his teammate. But Orochimaru had already chosen his path. To him, the Hidden Leaf was too small. Friendship was too limiting. Mortality was unacceptable. He wanted every jutsu, every secret, every form of knowledge the world had ever hidden. And if human lives had to be sacrificed along the way, then in his mind, that was simply the price of progress. Jiraiya could hardly recognize him. "What happened to you?" he asked. Orochimaru's answer was calm. That calmness hurt more than anger would have. Nothing Jiraiya said reached him. No memory of their childhood, no reminder of Hiruzen, no mention of Tsunade, no appeal to the bond they had once shared. Orochimaru walked away from the Hidden Leaf, from his teacher, from his friends, and from the last pieces of the boy he had once been. Jiraiya failed to bring him back. That failure stayed with him for the rest of his life. It was not simply that Orochimaru became a rogue ninja. It was that Jiraiya had watched one of his closest friends become someone capable of terrible things, and he had not stopped it in time. First, Yahiko was dead. Nagato and Konan were lost. Now, Orochimaru was gone too. Another student, another friend, another person Jiraiya could not save. The prophecy had once made him believe his life had a purpose. But as he watched Orochimaru disappear into the shadows, Jiraiya began to wonder if his true talent was not guiding people toward peace, but arriving too late to stop them from falling. Long before Naruto Uzumaki was born, Jiraiya had already met one of the most important students of his life, Minato Namikaze. From the beginning, Minato was different. He was not loud like Jiraiya had been as a boy. He did not stumble into lessons with wild confidence or try to cover his mistakes with jokes. Minato was calm, thoughtful, and naturally brilliant. He listened before acting. He learned quickly, but never arrogantly. Even when his talent became obvious, he treated others with kindness. That was what impressed Jiraiya most. Power was common in the shinobi world. Kindness was rare. As Minato grew older, Jiraiya watched him become one of the finest ninja the Hidden Leaf had ever produced. His speed became legendary. His intelligence saved lives on the battlefield. His heart made others trust him not only as a warrior, but as a leader. For a time, Jiraiya wondered if Minato might be connected to the great Toad Sage's prophecy. After all, Minato seemed like the kind of person who could change the world. He was strong enough to protect others, and gentle enough to understand why they needed protecting. But Jiraiya's life never allowed him to stay in one place for long. Between the aftermath of war, his years with the children in the Land of Rain, and his endless work gathering intelligence for the Hidden Leaf, he became a man who always seemed to be arriving late or leaving too soon. Still, his bond with Minato never disappeared. Over time, Minato fell in love with Kushina Uzumaki, a fierce and spirited kunoichi whose personality seemed to brighten every room she entered. She was bold, emotional, stubborn, and full of life. Where Minato was calm, Kushina was fire. Somehow, together, they became balanced. Jiraiya teased them whenever he had the chance, but beneath the jokes, he was proud. He had watched Minato grow from a gifted boy into a man worthy of admiration. Seeing him build a life with Kushina made Jiraiya feel, for once, that the world had given something good to someone who deserved it. Around that same time, Minato read Jiraiya's first novel, The Tale of the Utterly Gutsy Shinobi. The story had been inspired by the hope Jiraiya once saw in Nagato, the quiet boy from the land of rain who dreamed of ending hatred without becoming hatred himself. In the book, Jiraiya created a hero who never gave up, no matter how painful the road became. That hero's name was Naruto. When Minato read the book, he loved the character. He saw in that name a spirit he admired deeply: courage, stubbornness, compassion, and the refusal to surrender even when the world seemed impossible to change. So when Minato and Kushina learned they were going to have a child, they chose that name for their son: Naruto. Jiraiya laughed when he heard it, but the truth touched him more deeply than he let on. A name born from his story, a story born from Nagato's hope, would now belong to Minato's child. None of them could have understood how important that choice would become. Then came the night that shattered the hidden leaf. The nine-tailed fox attacked Konoha. Buildings collapsed beneath its enormous power. Shinobi fought desperately to protect the village. Families ran through smoke and fire while the beast's roar echoed across the night sky. By the time the disaster ended, Minato and Kushina were dead. They had sacrificed everything to save the village and protect their newborn son. The Nine Tails was sealed inside Naruto. When Jiraiya learned what had happened, grief settled over him like a weight he could not remove. Minato was gone. Kushina was gone. And Naruto, the child who carried their love, their sacrifice, and the name from Jiraiya's own book, was left behind to grow up in a village that did not understand him. Jiraiya did not raise Naruto day by day. That truth mattered. He was not the person who tucked Naruto into bed, cooked his meals, or stood beside him through every lonely birthday. His life as a spy and wandering shinobi kept him moving through dangerous places, chasing threats most people never knew existed. But that did not mean Naruto was unimportant to him. Far from it. Naruto was Minato's son, Kushina's son, the child named after the hero of Jiraiya's book. The boy connected, in ways no one yet understood, to the prophecy Jiraiya had carried for most of his life. Whenever Jiraiya returned to the hidden leaf, he heard stories about the boy. Naruto causing trouble. Naruto shouting about becoming Hokage. Naruto painting monuments, playing pranks, and demanding that everyone look at him. To many villagers, he was simply a nuisance. To Jiraiya, he was something painfully familiar. A lonely child trying to turn pain into laughter. A boy desperate to be seen. A boy who refused to let rejection decide his future. The name Naruto had begun as fiction. Now it belonged to a real boy. And that boy was waiting to become Jiraiya's final and greatest student. After the death of Hiruzen Sarutobi, the hidden leaf was left wounded and uncertain. The third Hokage had not simply been a leader. He had been a teacher, a protector. a symbol of stability for generations of shinobi. To Jiraiya, his death was deeply personal. Hiruzen was the man who had trained him, believed in him, scolded him, and shaped him into the shinobi he became. Losing him felt like losing one of the last anchors to his youth. In the aftermath, the village needed a new Hokage, and for a moment, Jiraiya's name rose to the surface. It made sense. He was one of the legendary Sannin. He had fought through wars, gathered intelligence across the world, and earned the respect of nearly every major nation. Few shinobi alive had more experience, more knowledge, or more power. But Jiraiya did not accept the title. Part of him believed he was not suited for the office. He was a wanderer, a spy, a teacher, a writer, and a man whose life had always been lived on the road. The Hokage's seat required someone who could remain in the village and carry its burdens every day. Jiraiya understood himself too well to pretend. So instead, he turned the village's attention towards someone else. Tsunade. She was strong enough to protect Konoha, wise enough to understand loss, and compassionate enough to fight for the lives of the people under her care. Jiraiya had once dreamed of becoming Hokage when he was young, but when the moment came, he chose what he believed the village needed most. Not himself, but the person best suited to lead. So Jiraiya took Naruto with him to find her. At first, Naruto did not understand the full weight of what they were doing. To him, Tsunade was simply a legendary woman they needed to bring back. But for Jiraiya, the search was personal. Tsunade was his teammate, his old friend, and one of the few people alive who truly understood the cost of their generation's failures. Along the way, Jiraiya began teaching Naruto the Rasengan. The technique had been created by Minato Namikaze, Naruto's father, though Naruto still did not know the full truth of that connection. To Naruto, it was simply an impossible spinning sphere of chakra that refused to obey him no matter how hard he tried. He failed constantly. He shouted, complained, nearly lost patience more than once. But every time he failed, he tried again. Jiraiya watched him with growing pride. Naruto was not a natural genius like Minato. He was not calm or polished, but he had guts. The same stubborn courage Jiraiya had once written into the hero of the tale of the utterly gutsy shinobi. The same refusal to quit that had inspired the fictional character named Naruto long before the real Naruto ever knew what his name truly carried. When they finally found Tsunade, the reunion was painful. She mocked the title of Hokage. She treated Naruto's dream as something childish. And Naruto, who had spent his entire life dreaming of becoming Hokage so the village would finally acknowledge him, could not accept that. He challenged her. Not because he understood all of her pain, but because he understood what it meant to cling to a dream when everyone else laughed at it. That was what began to reach Tsunade. Naruto reminded her of Nawaki. He reminded her of Dan. He reminded her of the version of herself that once believed dreams were worth protecting, even when they hurt. Then Orochimaru appeared. His arms had been sealed by Hiruzen during their final battle, leaving him unable to use many of his jutsu. He wanted Tsunade to heal him so he could continue chasing forbidden power. Once again, the three Sannin were pulled into the same story. Jiraiya, trying to protect the future. Tsunade, caught between fear and hope. Orochimaru, willing to sacrifice anything to escape weakness and death. The battle that followed forced Tsunade to confront everything she had been running from. Kabuto pushed Naruto to his limit, and Naruto, battered but unbroken, finally landed the Rasengan. It was not elegant. It was not effortless. but it was his. That moment changed Tsunade. Naruto's courage reminded her that dreams could die, but they could also be inherited. By the end of the battle, Tsunade chose to return to the Hidden Leaf and become the 5th Hokage. Jiraiya had refused the title for himself, but once again, he had guided the future in his own way. He brought the right person home. And Naruto, without realizing it, took another step toward becoming the kind of shinobi Jiraiya had spent his life searching for. A child who could inherit pain without surrendering to it. Jiraiya's concern for Naruto became urgent when Akatsuki finally moved in the open. 2 members came searching for the boy: Itachi Uchiha, Kisame Hoshigaki. Their arrival was a warning the Hidden Leaf could not ignore. Kisame was a dangerous missing nin from the Hidden Mist, a brutal swordsman with monstrous chakra and a weapon as terrifying as his reputation. But Itachi carried an even darker shadow. He was the prodigy who had slaughtered nearly the entire Uchiha clan, leaving only his younger brother Sasuke alive. When they came after Naruto, Jiraiya understood what it meant. Akatsuki was no longer only a rumor hidden in intelligence reports. They were actively hunting Jinchuriki. And Naruto, with the 9 tails sealed inside him, was one of their most valuable targets. The situation became dangerous quickly. Sasuke, driven by rage and old trauma, confronted Itachi and was overwhelmed by the brother he had spent years trying to catch. Naruto was still young, still unprepared for enemies of this level, and suddenly face to face with 2 shinobi far beyond anything he had fought before. Then Jiraiya arrived. His presence changed everything. He did not treat Itachi and Kisame like ordinary criminals, because they were not ordinary criminals. But he also did not hesitate. Naruto was in danger, and Jiraiya responded as both a protector and a legendary Sannin. Using one of his toad techniques, he trapped them inside the stomach of a giant toad, a living prison designed to make escape nearly impossible. For a moment, it seemed as if the Akatsuki members had been caught. But Itachi revealed a terrifying power of his own. Black flames burned through the toad's flesh. Amaterasu. A fire that did not behave like ordinary fire. Itachi and Kisame escaped, leaving behind proof that Akatsuki's strength was even more frightening than Jiraiya had feared. Jiraiya had protected Naruto, but the encounter taught him something important. The enemy hunting Naruto was not distant, not theoretical, not years away. They were already moving. From that point forward, Jiraiya's training carried a new urgency. Teaching Naruto the Rasengan, helping him summon toads, taking him across the world, and later preparing him for years of training were not only about helping him become stronger. They were about keeping him alive. After Sasuke left the Hidden Leaf, Naruto's world changed. The loss struck him deeply. Sasuke was not only his rival. He was one of the first people Naruto had ever truly connected with. Watching him walk away into darkness left Naruto feeling powerless in a way he hated. He wanted to bring him back. He wanted to become stronger. And this time, Jiraiya understood that ordinary training would not be enough. Akatsuki was moving. Orochimaru still lurked in the shadows. Sasuke had chosen a dangerous road. And Naruto carried the 9 tails inside him, a power that made him both a target and a weapon. So Jiraiya took Naruto away from the village. For about 2.5 years, they traveled together. It was not a peaceful journey. Jiraiya trained him constantly, pushing his body, his chakra, and his discipline far beyond what he had known before. Naruto learned more about survival, combat, and the wider world outside Konoha. He began to understand that becoming Hokage was not only about being acknowledged. It was about becoming strong enough to protect people from the kind of darkness that had taken Sasuke. Jiraiya also tried to help Naruto face the Nine Tails' power. He did not fully master it. That victory would come much later, through other trials and other teachers. But those years with Jiraiya forced Naruto to confront the truth that the beast inside him could not simply be ignored. Its chakra was dangerous, emotional, and difficult to control. Used recklessly, it could consume him. Used wisely, it might one day help him protect the people he loved. During those years, Jiraiya learned just how dangerous Naruto's burden truly was. There were moments when the beast's chakra began to overtake him. Naruto's eyes changed, his voice changed, his body changed. The warmth that made him Naruto seemed to vanish beneath something violent and overwhelming. One moment in particular nearly killed Jiraiya. While trying to help Naruto draw upon the Nine Tails chakra, Naruto transformed so violently that Jiraiya was badly injured. The attack left a terrible scar across his chest, a reminder that the boy he loved like family carried a power that could destroy him if his heart ever gave way to hatred. Jiraiya rarely spoke about that wound. When he did, he treated it almost like another reckless adventure he had somehow survived. But deep down, it frightened him. Not because Naruto had hurt him, because Jiraiya understood what that loss of control meant. If Naruto ever lost himself completely, the world would not see a lonely boy trying to become Hokage. It would see only a monster. That was why Jiraiya's training was never only about strength. It was about teaching Naruto to hold on to himself, to remember his bonds, to laugh, to care, to keep choosing people even when the darkness inside him tried to pull him away. Jiraiya had already watched Nagato's pain transform into something terrifying. He could not bear to watch the same thing happen to Naruto. As Naruto grew stronger, Jiraiya found himself living two lives. To Naruto, he was the ridiculous old master who laughed too loudly, told embarrassing stories, disappeared to research at the worst possible times, and somehow always knew exactly how to push him forward. But to the Hidden Leaf, Jiraiya was something far more serious. He was one of Konoha's greatest sources of intelligence. For decades, he had traveled across the shinobi world under the loose identity of a wandering writer. His books gave him an excuse to move from town to town, to speak with strangers, to sit in crowded inns, to listen quietly while merchants, shinobi, and travelers said more than they realized. A careless rumor in a tavern, a missing nin seen near a border, a village suddenly sealing its gates, a powerful fighter disappearing without explanation. To most people, these were scattered stories. To Jiraiya, they were pieces of a much larger puzzle. He had learned that danger rarely announced itself all at once. It gathered slowly, quietly, like storm clouds forming beyond the mountains. And over time, one name began to appear again and again in the whispers he followed. Akatsuki. The name hurt more than most people could understand. Because to Jiraiya, Akatsuki was not supposed to be a nightmare. It had once been Yahiko's dream. A movement born from the suffering of the Land of Rain. A group created by children who had seen war destroy everything and still dared to believe that peace was possible. When Jiraiya first heard that Yahiko had gathered followers under that name, part of him had been proud. It sounded like proof that his lessons had survived. But the Akatsuki he began hearing about now was different. This version moved in darkness. Its members were not hopeful young revolutionaries trying to protect the helpless. They were dangerous missing nin from across the world. Shinobi of terrifying ability. People who had abandoned their villages, their laws, and in some cases, their humanity. The reports were scattered at first. A powerful rogue ninja spotted wearing a black cloak decorated with red clouds. A Jinchuriki being hunted. A village losing contact with one of its strongest warriors. An assassination too clean to be ordinary. The more Jiraiya listened, the clearer the pattern became. Akatsuki was gathering power. Not randomly, not carelessly, with purpose. That was what disturbed him most. Criminal groups usually acted out of greed, revenge, or survival. They made mistakes. They argued. They left trails behind. Akatsuki was different. It moved with patience. Its members appeared only when necessary, then vanished before entire villages could respond. Each one seemed powerful enough to challenge elite shinobi on their own, yet they were working together under a single organization. Someone was leading them. Someone was planning something. And the center of that shadow seemed to point back toward one place: the Hidden Rain Village. Jiraiya did not want to believe it. Every time the evidence led him there, his mind returned to 3 children standing beneath a gray sky. Yahiko, who had dreamed of peace. Konan, who had quietly protected those she loved. Nagato, who had carried the Rinnegan and a heart too gentle for the world that wounded him. For years, Jiraiya had told himself that their story was tragedy enough. Yahiko was dead. Konan and Nagato had vanished. The dream had ended. But now, another possibility began to form. What if the dream had not ended? What if it had survived, but changed into something unrecognizable? The thought followed Jiraiya wherever he went. During his travels, he continued gathering information. He heard of Akatsuki members with abilities that sounded almost impossible. He learned that the organization was not merely collecting money or influence. Its movements suggested something much larger. They were hunting power on a scale that could threaten every nation. And somewhere behind it all was a leader people barely understood. A figure connected to the Hidden Rain. A figure some whispered about with fear. A figure whose name appeared more and more often in the reports. Pain. Jiraiya would sit alone in small rented rooms, spreading maps and notes across wooden tables while rain tapped against distant windows. He connected names, locations, rumors, disappearances, and sightings, trying to understand how a movement born from Yahiko's hope had become a force that made entire villages tremble. The answer refused to come. But the feeling in his chest grew heavier. He was no longer investigating only an enemy organization. He was investigating the remains of something he had once helped create. That made the mission more dangerous than any ordinary assignment. Because if Akatsuki truly led back to Nagato and Konan, then Jiraiya would not simply be facing criminals. He would be facing his past. And perhaps the most painful truth a teacher can ever discover: that the lessons he gave with love may have been twisted by a world filled with cruelty. By the time Jiraiya began to understand how dangerous Akatsuki had become, he was no longer simply chasing rumors. The pieces were starting to connect. The organization had once been born from Yahiko's dream of peace, but now it had become something far darker. Powerful missing nin had gathered under its banner. Jinchuriki were being hunted. Entire nations were beginning to feel the movement of a shadow they did not yet fully understand. And at the center of that shadow was the Hidden Rain Village. Jiraiya knew what that meant. If he wanted the truth, he would have to return to the place where one of the deepest regrets of his life had begun. Before leaving, he returned to the Hidden Leaf and met with Tsunade. By then, Tsunade had become the 5th Hokage. The girl who once fought beside him as part of Team Hiruzen now carried the burden of the entire village on her shoulders. She sat behind the Hokage's desk, surrounded by reports, responsibilities, and the quiet exhaustion that came with protecting thousands of lives. Jiraiya tried to act casual. He always did. He joked. He smiled. He carried himself like the same reckless man she had known since childhood. But Tsunade knew him too well. She could see when the laughter was hiding something heavier. When Jiraiya told her he planned to infiltrate the Hidden Rain village alone, the mood changed. Tsunade understood the danger immediately. The Hidden Rain was nearly impossible to enter. Its borders were sealed, its leadership was mysterious, and every report suggested that pain ruled the village with absolute control. If Jiraiya's suspicions were correct, he would be walking directly into the heart of Akatsuki's power. She did not want him to go. Not because she doubted his strength, because she knew exactly how strong an enemy had to be for Jiraiya to look so serious while pretending not to be. For a moment, the two old friends spoke not as Hokage and shinobi, but as the last remaining pieces of a team that life had slowly broken apart. Hiruzen was gone. Orochimaru had fallen into darkness. Their youth had vanished into war, loss, and duty. And now Jiraiya was preparing to leave for a mission from which even he might not return. Tsunade tried to mask her concern with irritation, the way she always had. Jiraiya answered with humor, the way he always had. But beneath their familiar rhythm was something neither of them fully said. They had spent a lifetime missing the right moment. Jiraiya had loved Tsunade in his own flawed, patient, joking way for years. Tsunade had always known there was something there, even if grief, pride, and time kept them from turning it into anything simple. Now, standing before her, Jiraiya seemed closer to saying goodbye than he wanted to admit. Tsunade warned him not to die. Jiraiya smiled. He told her that whenever she bet against something, the opposite usually happened. If she bet that he would die, maybe that meant he would survive. It was exactly the kind of foolish joke only Jiraiya would make before walking into one of the most dangerous missions of his life. Tsunade did not laugh much. Not because it wasn't funny, because it sounded too much like a farewell. Before he left, Jiraiya gave her one final grin, the same grin he had worn since they were children training under Hiruzen. Loud, careless, brave. False, in the way only someone who knew him deeply could recognize. Then he turned away and began his journey. As he left the hidden leaf behind, Jiraiya carried more than weapons, scrolls, and intelligence notes. He carried the memory of Minato, the guilt of Nagato, the loss of Yahiko, the shadow of Orochimaru, the unspoken love he had never fully reached with Tsunade, and the stubborn hope that Naruto might one day succeed where all of them had failed. For most shinobi, this would have been just another mission. For Jiraiya, it felt like the closing of a circle. The prophecy had led him across the world. Now it was leading him back into the rain. The Hidden Rain village greeted Jiraiya with the same endless storm he remembered. Rain fell from a sky that never seemed to clear. It slid down steel towers, gathered in alleyways, and turned every street into a mirror of gray light. Pipes twisted through the village like veins, carrying water through a city built as much from metal and shadow as from stone. Years ago, Jiraiya had found 3 starving children in this land. Now he returned as a spy. He entered carefully, using every skill gathered across decades of intelligence work. Jiraiya was loud by nature, but on a mission like this, he became almost invisible. He moved through hidden passages, slipped between blind spots, and allowed the rain itself to cover the sound of his movements. Still, something felt wrong almost immediately. This was not ordinary rain. Jiraiya could feel it. The droplets did not simply fall, they watched. Everywhere the rain touched, It seemed to carry awareness with it. The entire village felt connected to a presence far larger than any single patrol or guard. It was as if the sky had become part of the village's security system. Jiraiya understood then why the hidden rain was so difficult to infiltrate. Anyone who entered was noticed. Anyone suspicious was hunted. And anyone who threatened the ruler of this place disappeared before they could tell the outside world what they had seen. As he moved deeper into the village, Jiraiya listened. People spoke softly here. Too softly. Merchants lowered their voices when discussing politics. Civilians avoided certain streets. Shinobi moved with perfect discipline, as though they feared punishment more than any enemy. The village had order, but it was not peace. Peace felt warm. This felt controlled. Again and again, Jiraiya heard the same name. Pain. The people did not speak of him like a leader. They spoke of him like a divine force. Some called him their protector. Some called him their judge. Some simply called him God. That word troubled Jiraiya most. He had seen many powerful shinobi in his life. He had fought legends, trained prodigies, and faced enemies strong enough to terrify entire nations. But men who allowed themselves to be worshipped as gods were often the most dangerous of all, because they stopped seeing other people as human. The deeper Jiraiya investigated, the heavier the old memories became. He remembered Yahiko standing in the rain, declaring that he would change his country. He remembered Konan quietly watching over her friends. He remembered Nagato's gentle voice asking whether peace was truly possible. Those children had hated the suffering war created. So how had their homeland become this? A silent city, a watched city. A city where people whispered the name Pain as if saying it too loudly might summon judgment from the sky. Jiraiya eventually found the opportunity he needed. Two shinobi of the Hidden Rain moved through a quiet section of the village, unaware that they had already been marked. Jiraiya waited until the rain, the shadows, and the narrow streets all worked in his favor. Then he struck. The capture was quick, clean, silent. Before either man could alert the village, Jiraiya pulled them into the hidden space inside one of his summoned toads, a place where even the strange rain above could not easily follow. There, away from Pain's watching sky, he began asking questions. At first, the rain shinobi resisted. Fear held their tongues more tightly than loyalty. But little by little, the truth emerged. Pain had not simply taken control of the Hidden Rain. He had overthrown Hanzo. The same Hanzo who had once stood above Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru on the battlefield. The same warrior who had named them the Legendary Sannin. The same ruler whose fear and betrayal had helped destroy Yahiko's dream. Pain had killed him. But he had not stopped there. According to the Rain Shinobi, Pain had wiped out not only Hanzo, but those connected to him as well. Family, allies, supporters, anyone who might carry his influence forward. It was not merely a change in leadership. It was judgment, total and merciless. Jiraiya listened in silence. Part of him understood why someone would hate Hanzo. Hanzo's betrayal had helped create the tragedy that consumed Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato. But this was different. This was not justice. This was vengeance wearing the mask of peace. The more Jiraiya learned, the clearer the truth became. The Hidden Rain was not free. It had simply traded one feared ruler for another. And somewhere, at the center of that fear, was a name the villagers spoke like a prayer. Pain. Jiraiya released a slow breath. He had come searching for Akatsuki's leader. Now he knew he was searching for the man who had conquered an entire village, killed one of the most dangerous shinobi alive, and convinced the survivors to worship him as a god. Then the air shifted. A soft rustle filled the hidden space. Paper. White sheets folded and unfolded in the darkness, drifting like petals through the air. Jiraiya turned slowly. He knew that technique, and before the woman fully formed in front of him, his heart already understood. Konan had found him. Paper began to flutter through the air. At first, it looked harmless, almost beautiful. Sheets of white folded and unfolded in the rain, drifting through the darkness like petals caught in the wind. Then the paper sharpened, the pieces gathered, a figure formed. Jiraiya's breath caught. Konan. She stood before him, older, colder, and wrapped in the black cloak of the Akatsuki. The quiet little girl who once folded paper flowers in a broken shelter had become a dangerous woman whose expression revealed almost nothing. For a moment, neither of them attacked. Jiraiya looked at her and saw two people at once, the child he had protected, and the enemy standing in his way. "Konan," he said softly. Her eyes did not soften. "Jiraiya-sensei." The word struck him harder than any weapon. Sensei. After all these years, she still called him that. But there was no warmth in it now, only distance, only history. Only a grief so old it had turned into loyalty to someone else. Jiraiya tried to speak to her, but Konan had not come for a reunion. She had come to stop an intruder. Her body dissolved into paper, thousands of sheets swirling through the chamber like a storm of blades. Jiraiya responded instantly, using toad oil to weigh down her paper and limit her movement. The technique worked. For a brief moment, Konan was trapped, but Jiraiya did not celebrate. Looking at her helpless form, he felt no victory, only sorrow. "What happened to you?" he asked. Konan stared back at him. "You left." The words were simple, quiet, devastating. Jiraiya had no answer strong enough to defend himself. Before he could say anything more, the air changed. A new presence entered, cold, immense, unmistakable. Konan turned her head slightly, and Jiraiya felt the shift immediately. Whoever had arrived was not merely another Akatsuki member. This was the person she followed. This was the one the village worshipped. From the shadows stepped a figure with strange black piercings across his face and the same black cloak marked by red clouds. But Jiraiya barely noticed the cloak. His eyes went straight to the stranger's eyes. The Rinnegan. The legendary ripple-patterned eyes stared back at him without warmth, without hesitation, without even the faintest flicker of the child Jiraiya remembered. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow around those eyes. Nagato. It had to be connected to Nagato, and yet the face was wrong. This body did not look like the fragile red-haired boy he had trained years ago. The voice was different. The presence was different. Everything about him felt both familiar and impossible. Still, when the figure spoke, the words confirmed the connection Jiraiya feared most. "It has been a long time, Jiraiya-sensei." Jiraiya's heart sank. The prophecy. The Rinnegan. The children in the rain. The organization called Akatsuki. All of it had led him back here. He had come to the hidden rain, searching for the leader of a criminal organization. Instead, he had found the ruins of his own past, staring back at him through the eyes of a god. Jiraiya stood across from the figure called Pain, trying to force his mind to accept what his eyes were seeing. The Rinnegan belonged to Nagato. That much seemed impossible to deny. And yet the body standing before him was not Nagato. It was taller, different, pierced with black rods that gave the face an unnatural, almost lifeless quality. Jiraiya studied every detail: the posture, the voice, the expression. Something was wrong. The student he remembered had been quiet and gentle, a boy who hated violence even after violence had taken everything from him. This person spoke with absolute certainty, as though compassion itself had become a weakness. "What are you now?" Jiraiya asked. Pain looked at him without emotion. "A god." The answer chilled him. Not because it sounded arrogant, because Pain seemed to believe it completely. He spoke of war as if it were a disease only he could cure. He spoke of suffering as if it were a tool. To him, the world would never understand peace through kindness, cooperation, or hope. It would only understand pain. Jiraiya felt the old wound in his heart open again. This was not what he had taught them. This was not the dream Yahiko had spoken about. This was not the future Nagato had once wanted. But there was no time to mourn what had been lost. Pain attacked. The battle began violently, with summoned creatures bursting into the chamber one after another. Enormous beasts crashed through walls and tore apart the surrounding structure, each one driven by the same terrifying power of the Rinnegan. Jiraiya responded with the instincts of a man who had survived decades of war. He dodged, countered, analyzed. Every movement had purpose. He was not simply fighting to survive, he was gathering information. Pain's summons were not ordinary creatures. They appeared with strange black piercings, just like the body controlling them. They moved with relentless aggression, forcing Jiraiya to constantly reposition himself while protecting his escape routes. The chamber quickly became a battlefield. Metal walls bent, pipes shattered. Rain poured through broken openings above. Jiraiya bit his thumb and slammed his hand down. "Summoning Jutsu!" A massive cloud of smoke filled the air. When it cleared, Gamaken appeared with his weapon in hand, towering over the battlefield. The great toad looked around at the chaos. "Jiraiya, you always drag me into troublesome situations." Jiraiya gave a tired grin. "That's why I called someone reliable." Gamaken sighed. "I am clumsy, but I will do my best." Together, they fought back against Pain's monstrous summons. Gamaken held the creatures off with enormous strength, buying Jiraiya precious time to think. And thinking was the only thing that might save him. The more Jiraiya watched, the more uneasy he became. Pain's abilities did not match what he remembered of Nagato. The face was wrong. The fighting style was wrong. Even the way he moved felt wrong. But the Rinnegan was real. The chakra was real. The danger was real. Somewhere inside this mystery was the truth. And Jiraiya knew that if he failed to uncover it, the hidden leaf would be blind against one of the most powerful enemies it had ever faced. Pain continued pressing the attack. A giant chameleon vanished from sight. A massive, multi-headed dog split apart whenever damaged. Another creature struck from above, forcing Gamaken to intercept the blow before it crushed Jiraiya completely. The old Sannin felt the pressure building. This was only one body, one enemy, one face of Pain. And already the battle had become deadly. Jiraiya realized he could not win with ordinary techniques alone. He needed more power, more perception, more time. He needed Sage Mode. But entering Sage Mode in the middle of battle required stillness, focus, and the ability to gather natural energy without being torn apart first. Against an enemy this relentless, that was almost impossible. Almost. Jiraiya leapt back beside Gamaken, breathing heavily as rain streamed down his face. "Buy me time," he said. Gamaken tightened his grip on his weapon. I will try. Jiraiya closed his eyes for only a moment. Around him, the battle roared. Summoned beasts shrieked, the tower trembled. Rain poured through the broken walls. And somewhere behind all of it stood Pain, watching with those legendary eyes. Jiraiya could feel the truth hiding just beyond his reach. He was not yet facing the full mystery. He was only standing at its entrance. And to go any deeper, the old Toad Sage would have to summon the power of Mount Myoboku itself. Jiraiya knew he could not keep fighting this way forever. Pain's summoned creatures were relentless. A giant dog split apart whenever it was damaged. A chameleon vanished into the rain. Other beasts attacked from above, below, and every direction in between. Each one bore the same strange black piercings as the body commanding them. Gamaken fought with everything he had, holding the monsters back as best he could. But even he understood the danger. This was not a battle that could be won through strength alone. Jiraiya needed Sage Mode. The problem was time. To enter Sage Mode, he had to gather natural energy. For most shinobi, that meant becoming completely still. But against Pain, standing still for even a few seconds could mean death. So Jiraiya turned to the only allies who could help him do the impossible. He summoned Fukasaku and Shima, the two elder Toad Sages of Mount Myoboku. They appeared in a burst of smoke, landing on his shoulders as the battlefield shook around them. Fukasaku immediately looked annoyed. Jiraiya boy, you really did find yourself a troublesome opponent this time. Shima glanced at the destruction around them. Troublesome? This looks worse than troublesome. Jiraiya managed a tired grin. I was hoping you two would say something encouraging. We're encouraging you not to die, Shima snapped. Even in the middle of battle, the familiar voices gave Jiraiya a small measure of comfort. For decades, Mount Myoboku had been part of his life. The Toads had trained him, scolded him, fought beside him, and watched him grow from a reckless young shinobi into the man standing here now. If this was to become his final battle, he would not face it alone. Fukasaku and Shima began gathering natural energy for him, while Jiraiya continued moving. Pain's attacks intensified immediately, as though he understood that allowing the transformation to finish would be dangerous. Gamaken intercepted the summoned beasts again and again. Jiraiya dodged by inches. Stone shattered around him. Water exploded through broken pipes. The tower trembled beneath the force of every collision. Then, at last, the energy changed. Jiraiya's body transformed. His features became more toad-like. His hands, eyes, and face shifted as natural energy flooded through him. It was not a perfect Sage Mode. Even after all his years of training, Jiraiya had never fully mastered it the way Naruto eventually would. But imperfect did not mean weak. The moment Sage Mode awakened, the entire battle changed. Jiraiya's senses sharpened. His strength increased. His speed rose dramatically. Every movement became heavier, faster, and more dangerous. For the first time, Pain was forced to react. Jiraiya struck with enough force to send enemies crashing through walls. Fukasaku and Shima combined their techniques with his, creating attacks that blended fire, oil, wind, and natural energy into devastating combinations. Pain responded by summoning more bodies. Now Jiraiya was no longer facing only one opponent. 3 figures stood against him. Each wore the same black cloak. Each carried the same piercings. Each possessed the Rinnegan. Jiraiya stared at them, trying to understand what he was seeing. 3 bodies, 1 set of eyes, different abilities. The mystery deepened with every second. One body summoned creatures. Another absorbed ninjutsu. Another attacked directly with terrifying speed. Together, they moved with coordination so perfect that it felt unnatural. Whenever Jiraiya created an opening against one, another immediately covered it. Whenever he escaped one attack, the next was already waiting. It was as if all three shared the same vision. The realization struck him gradually. Their eyes were connected. They were seeing through one another. That meant normal blind spots did not exist. A sneak attack would fail. A frontal assault would be punished. Even Sage Mode would not be enough unless Jiraiya found a way to break their unity. So the Elder Toads prepared one of Mount Myoboku's most powerful techniques. A sound-based genjutsu. Frog Song. It was difficult to use and required time to prepare. But if it succeeded, even enemies as powerful as Pain could be trapped. Jiraiya fought desperately to create that time. He endured attacks that would have defeated lesser shinobi. He bought seconds with bruises, moments with blood. Every movement became part of a larger strategy. Finally, the song began. Fukasaku and Shima's voices echoed through the battlefield in a strange, haunting rhythm. The sound slipped past defenses, wrapped around the three bodies, and pulled them into illusion before they could escape. For one brief moment, Pain stopped moving. Jiraiya did not waste the chance. With the three bodies trapped, he struck decisively. One after another they fell. Silence returned to the battlefield. Rain poured through the broken tower. Jiraiya stood breathing heavily, his body aching from the strain of Sage Mode and the long battle that had brought him to this point. For the first time since entering the hidden rain, it seemed possible. Perhaps he had done it. Perhaps he had defeated Pain. Then something moved behind him. A new body appeared without warning. Before Jiraiya could fully react, a devastating attack tore through him. His left arm was severed. Pain exploded through his body like lightning. Jiraiya staggered forward, shock and agony flashing across his face. The battle was not over. It had barely begun. From the shadows, more bodies emerged. The three he had defeated were not the end of Pain's secret. They were only part of it. Now, standing before Jiraiya beneath the endless rain, were 6 bodies. 6 pairs of Rinnegan eyes. 6 faces wearing the same expressionless certainty. The truth was no longer simply frightening. It was impossible. And yet Jiraiya, bleeding and exhausted, forced himself to keep looking. Because somewhere in those 6 faces was the answer the hidden leaf would need to survive. Jiraiya stood before the 6 paths of pain, with blood running down his side and his left arm gone. Most shinobi would have collapsed from the wound alone. Jiraiya remained standing. Not because he felt no pain, because the mission was not finished. The 6 bodies watched him in silence, each bearing the same ripple-patterned eyes. Their presence filled the ruined chamber with a pressure unlike anything Jiraiya had ever felt. This was not one enemy, not in the ordinary sense. It was a system, a secret, a terrible answer hidden behind 6 dead faces. Jiraiya forced himself to study them carefully. Every detail mattered. The black piercings, the shared vision, the different abilities, the way the bodies moved without hesitation, as though guided by a single will. Then another realization struck him. He had seen these faces before. Not all at once, not together, but throughout his years of wandering the ninja world. A shinobi from the Fuma clan. A man he had crossed paths with during his travels. Others whose lives had intersected with his own long before this battle. These were not random bodies. They were people Jiraiya had encountered in the past. People who should not be standing here with the Rinnegan. People who were not Nagato. His mind raced. If these bodies belonged to others, if each one had once been a separate person, then Pain was not truly any of them. The Rinnegan connected them. The black receivers controlled them. The 6 bodies were weapons, but the real enemy, the real Pain, was somewhere else. Hidden, watching, controlling everything from beyond the battlefield. Jiraiya's heart pounded as the answer finally became clear. The true Pain was not among them. That was the secret. That was the information Konoha needed. That was the one truth Naruto would have to understand if he ever faced this enemy. Pain looked at him coldly. There was no anger in his voice, only certainty. "You have done well to come this far, Jiraiya-sensei." The words carried no comfort. Jiraiya almost laughed. Even now, hearing that title still hurt. Sensei. Once, that word had meant campfires, training, shared meals, and 3 children dreaming beneath the rain. Now it came from corpses controlled by a student he had failed to save. Pain continued. "If you had known our secret from the beginning, perhaps you could have won." For a moment, even the enemy seemed to acknowledge the truth. Jiraiya had not lost because he was weak. He had lost because he had been forced to solve an impossible mystery while fighting for his life. And somehow, he had solved it. Now he had to send it home. The 6 paths attacked. Jiraiya moved despite the agony burning through his body. Every step was slower now. Every breath came harder. Sage mode had faded. His strength was running out, and even his legendary endurance had limits. But his will did not. He fought through the pain long enough to create a narrow opening. Fukasaku understood immediately. The old toad had fought beside him for too long to miss what Jiraiya's eyes were saying. There was no time for a long explanation. No time for a full report. No time to write the entire truth. Only a code. A clue. A message that would survive even if Jiraiya did not. Then pain struck again. The attack crushed Jiraiya's throat, stealing his voice. He could no longer speak the answer aloud. For an instant, darkness closed around him. His body wanted to give in. His mind drifted toward silence. But deep inside, something refused. Naruto. The thought pulled him back. Jiraiya forced himself into consciousness one final time. If he could not speak, he would write. With the last strength remaining in his body, he carved a coded message onto Fukasaku's back. It was not elegant. It was not complete. But it contained the truth. The real one isn't among them. That message was everything. It was the key to Pain's secret, the final lesson of the Toad Sage, the one piece of knowledge that could give the next generation a chance. Fukasaku vanished, carrying the message into the rain. Jiraiya watched him escape. Relief passed across his face. He had not defeated Pain. He had not saved Nagato. He had not escaped the hidden rain. But he had completed the mission. For a shinobi, that was enough. Fukasaku disappeared into the rain, carrying Jiraiya's final message. For the first time since entering the hidden rain village, Jiraiya allowed himself to feel relief. The truth had escaped. Whether Konoha could decode the message in time, whether Naruto would understand it, whether the next generation could succeed where he had failed, Jiraiya would never know. Pain struck one final time. Jiraiya's body was thrown from the ruined structure and into the cold waters below. The world became quiet. Rain fell above the surface. Darkness surrounded him below. As he sank, the battlefield disappeared. So did pain. So did the hidden rain. In his final moments, Jiraiya's mind drifted backward through the long, strange story of his life. He remembered himself as a boy. Loud, clumsy, always trying too hard. Always falling behind Orochimaru's genius and Tsunade's strength, yet somehow always climbing back to his feet. He remembered Hiruzen, the teacher who saw potential in him before he had earned the right to see it in himself. He remembered Mount Myoboku, the great toad sage, the prophecy that had followed him for decades like a riddle he could never fully solve. He remembered Orochimaru, his friend, his rival, the brilliant boy who had become a man lost to obsession. Jiraiya had chased him, pleaded with him, hoped for him, and failed to bring him back. He remembered Tsunade, her strength, her grief, her laughter. The love he never truly reached for, perhaps because life always seemed to place another war, another mission, or another regret between them. He remembered Minato, the gifted student who had become the fourth Hokage. A young man so brilliant, kind, and brave that Jiraiya had once wondered if the prophecy pointed to him. Then he remembered Naruto, the boy named after the hero of his book, the son of Minato and Kushina, the loud, stubborn child who had every reason to hate the world, yet still dreamed of protecting it. A faint smile touched Jiraiya's face beneath the water. Naruto had always reminded him of himself, not because he was perfect, because he refused to give up. For so long, Jiraiya had believed his life was a story of failure. He failed to save Orochimaru. He failed to save Nagato. He never married Tsunade. He never became Hokage. Again and again, the dreams he reached for seemed to slip through his fingers. But as he sank deeper into the darkness, another truth finally became clear. A teacher's story does not end with his own victories. It continues through the students who carry his will forward. Minato had protected the village. Nagato, even after everything, had once carried a true desire for peace. And Naruto would write the next chapter. Jiraiya thought of his first novel, the tale of the utterly gutsy shinobi, and the hero who never surrendered no matter how painful the road became. At the time, that hero had been fiction. Now he was real. Jiraiya's smile softened. The sequel would not be called The Tale of Jiraiya the Gallant. It would belong to Naruto Uzumaki, the boy who inherited his master's dream, the boy who might finally break the cycle of hatred, the boy who would prove that hope could survive even the deepest pain. As the last of his strength faded, Jiraiya no longer felt like a failure. He had not lived a perfect life. He had not won every battle. He had not saved everyone he loved. But he had left behind something stronger than regret. A student who could still choose peace. A story that could still continue. And a dream that had not yet died. When Jiraiya's final message reached the Hidden Leaf, it did not arrive as a grand farewell. There was no long explanation, no heroic speech, no full report carefully written in his own hand. Only a coded clue carried back by Fukasaku. A strange sequence of numbers, a warning born from blood, pain, and the final moments of a dying man. At first, the message made little sense. That was the cruelty of it. Jiraiya had discovered the truth about one of the most dangerous enemies the world had ever seen, but he had been given almost no time to explain it. His throat had been crushed. His body had been pierced. His strength had nearly vanished. So he left behind what he could. A code. A final puzzle. One last lesson from a teacher who had spent his life forcing his students to think beyond what stood directly in front of them. When Tsunade learned that Jiraiya was dead, the news struck her in a place no title could protect. She was the 5th Hokage. She had to remain strong. She had to think of the village. She had to prepare for the threat that had killed one of the strongest shinobi Konoha had ever known. But before she was Hokage, she had been his teammate, his friend, the girl he had tried to impress since they were children, the woman who had known him through war, laughter, failure, and grief. For years, Jiraiya had always returned, no matter how dangerous the mission, no matter how reckless the journey, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. Somehow, he always came back with a grin, a joke, and another ridiculous story. This time, there would be no return. And somewhere beneath the responsibilities of the Hokage, Tsunade had to face the truth that one of the last pieces of her youth was gone. Naruto's grief was different. At first, he could not accept it. Jiraiya was too strong, too clever, too stubborn. The old man had survived wars, monsters, criminals, and impossible battles. Someone like him was supposed to appear again eventually, laughing as though everyone had worried for nothing. But the truth did not change. Jiraiya was gone. The teacher who had believed in Naruto before the world fully understood him would never again walk through the gates of the Hidden Leaf. Naruto did not know what to do with grief that large. He had felt loneliness before. He had felt rejection. He had felt anger. But this was different. Jiraiya's absence was not loud. It was quiet. That was what made it hurt so much. There would be no sudden entrance, no ridiculous laugh echoing down the street, no hand landing heavily on Naruto's head. No old man pretending not to care while caring more deeply than he ever admitted. At one point, Naruto sat alone with a popsicle in his hand. It was the kind meant to be split in two, one half for yourself, one half for someone beside you. But Jiraiya was gone. Naruto stared at it, and the simple shape of that frozen treat became almost unbearable. Something so small suddenly carried the weight of everything he had lost. The road trips, the training, the teasing, the meals, the strange comfort of having someone there. For years, Naruto had dreamed of being acknowledged by the village. But Jiraiya had given him something even more precious. He had given Naruto the feeling of not being alone. And now that feeling had been ripped away. When the tears finally came, Naruto did not fight them. For once, the boy who always shouted through pain simply sat with it. The world had taken his master, his teacher, the man who had named him through a story before Naruto was even born. But grief was not the end of Jiraiya's lesson. It was the beginning of Naruto's next one. Because if Naruto allowed that pain to become hatred, then pain would win before the battle even began. Even in death, Jiraiya continued to teach. The code he left behind became a mystery the Hidden Leaf had to solve. It was connected to Jiraiya's own writing, to the strange world of books and stories that had always followed him wherever he went. That detail felt painfully fitting. The wandering writer left behind his final truth hidden inside the language of his own life. Eventually, the message became clear. The real one isn't among them. It was the key to understanding pain. The 6 bodies were not the true enemy. They were vessels, weapons, faces of a hidden will operating from somewhere else. Without that clue, Naruto would have entered the coming battle blind. Without that clue, the hidden leaf might never have understood the secret behind pain's power. Without that clue, Jiraiya's final mission would have ended in silence. But Jiraiya made sure his death had meaning. He had not defeated pain. He had not escaped. He had not saved Nagato from the darkness that consumed him. But he had done what great teachers do. He gave the next generation what they needed to continue. As Naruto prepared to train at Mount Myoboku, the full weight of Jiraiya's life began to settle over him. This was not only about revenge. It could not be. Jiraiya had not died so Naruto could become another person swallowed by hatred. He had died trying to uncover the truth, trying to protect the village, trying to give his student a chance to succeed where he could not. That was the difference between grief and legacy. Grief looked backward and asked why someone had to die. Legacy looked forward and asked what their life still demanded from those left behind. For Naruto, that answer was clear. He would train. He would grow stronger. He would face pain. But if he truly wanted to honor Jiraiya, he would have to do more than win a battle. He would have to carry the dream his teacher had spent a lifetime chasing. The dream of ending the cycle of hatred. The dream that had passed from Jiraiya to Nagato to Naruto. The dream that had been wounded, twisted, buried, and nearly lost. But not destroyed. Because as long as Naruto still stood, Jiraiya's story was not finished. It had simply entered the hands of the student who would write the next chapter. Long after Jiraiya disappeared beneath the waters of the hidden rain village, his story continued. Not because he returned, not because legends never die, but because the people he loved carried pieces of him forward. In the days after his death, Naruto struggled beneath the weight of grief. Jiraiya had been more than a teacher. He had been the first adult who truly felt like family after years of loneliness. He was the old man who laughed too loudly, trained too harshly, told ridiculous stories, and believed in Naruto before the world fully understood him. At first, Naruto could barely accept that he was gone. Jiraiya had survived wars, faced monsters, walked into danger with a grin. Someone like that was supposed to come back. But this time, he didn't. All that remained were memories, lessons, and one final message carved into the back of a toad. The real one isn't among them. That clue became one of Jiraiya's final gifts to the world. Because of it, the hidden leaf began to understand pain's secret. Because of it, Naruto entered the battle with knowledge Jiraiya had died to uncover. And because of it, the next generation had a chance to succeed where even a legendary Sannin could not. But Jiraiya's true legacy was never only the message. It was the heart he left behind. When Naruto finally stood before Nagato, he faced the living result of everything Jiraiya had feared. Nagato had known war, he had known hunger, he had known betrayal. He had watched Yahiko die in front of him and had carried that pain until it twisted his dream of peace into something terrifying. To Nagato, suffering had become the only language humanity understood. He believed the world could only be united through shared pain. Naruto had every reason to hate him. Pain had killed Jiraiya, destroyed the hidden leaf, wounded countless innocent people. And yet, when the moment came, Naruto did something extraordinary. He listened. He chose understanding over revenge. He chose to carry Jiraiya's dream forward instead of letting grief turn him into another link in the chain of hatred. That was the moment Jiraiya's teachings truly came alive. For years, Jiraiya had searched for the child of prophecy. At different points in his life, he wondered if it might be Minato, then Nagato, then Naruto. But the truth was larger than even Jiraiya understood. Nagato and Naruto were both part of the answer. Nagato carried the pain of the world. Naruto carried the hope to heal it. One showed what suffering could create when hope was crushed. The other showed what suffering could become when someone refused to surrender their heart. And both had been shaped by the same teacher. That is what makes Jiraiya's life so powerful. He did not simply train warriors, he planted ideas. In Yahiko, he nurtured the dream of peace. In Nagato, he awakened the belief that pain did not have to define a person. In Minato, he helped guide a future Hokage. In Naruto, he found the student who could carry all of those unfinished dreams into the future. Jiraiya never became Hokage, but he trained one Hokage and helped shape another. He never defeated Orochimaru, but his loyalty showed that he never stopped believing people could be reached. He never saved Nagato from darkness, but the lessons he gave Nagato were still powerful enough for Naruto to reach him years later. He never married Tsunade, but their bond remained one of the quiet emotional threads of his life. He believed, for so long, that his story was defined by the things he failed to do. History tells a different story. The awkward boy who struggled to keep up became one of the most important shinobi who ever lived. The wandering writer who chased a prophecy helped shape the very people who fulfilled it. The man who thought he had failed as a teacher left behind students who changed the fate of the world. That is why Jiraiya remains unforgettable. He was funny, flawed, wise, foolish, brave, lonely, loving, and deeply human. He could make people laugh one moment and break their hearts the next. He carried regret, but never stopped moving. He suffered loss, but never stopped believing. He saw the worst of the shinobi world, yet still trusted that someone, someday, might find a better way. In the end, Jiraiya's greatest victory was not a battle. It was Naruto. It was the moment his student chose mercy when revenge would have been easier. It was the moment Nagato remembered the dream he had buried beneath years of pain. It was the moment the cycle of hatred cracked, even if only slightly, because one old teacher had refused to give up on the future. Jiraiya the Gallant never wore the Hokage's hat. He never ruled the Hidden Leaf. He never lived to see the peaceful world he spent his life searching for. But his dream survived him. It lived in his students. It lived in his stories. It lived in the stubborn, impossible hope of a boy named Naruto Uzumaki. And maybe that was the answer all along. Some heroes change the world by standing at the center of history. Others change it quietly, by teaching the person who will. Jiraiya spent his life searching for the answer to one impossible question. How can the world escape the endless cycle of hatred? He searched for that answer in battle. He searched for it in books. He searched for it in prophecy. And most of all, he searched for it in his students. For a time, he saw hope in Minato, the brilliant young shinobi who became the fourth Hokage. Then he saw it in Nagato, the wounded child with legendary eyes and a heart that once longed for peace. And finally, he saw it in Naruto, the lonely boy named after the hero of his own story. Jiraiya did not live a perfect life. He failed to save people he loved. He carried regrets he never fully escaped. He laughed loudly, acted foolishly, made mistakes, and often hid his pain behind jokes. But maybe that is why his story feels so human. Because Jiraiya was not great because he never failed. He was great because he kept believing after failure. He kept teaching after loss. He kept loving a world that had given him every reason to give up on it. And in the end, that belief became his true legacy. Minato protected the Hidden Leaf. Nagato carried the pain of the world. Naruto carried the hope to heal it. And through all of them, Jiraiya's dream continued. Thank you for joining me on this peaceful journey through the full life of Jiraiya the Gallant. If you enjoyed this story and want more complete anime character timelines, consider leaving a like and subscribing to Sleepy Otaku Stories. It truly helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing these stories to life. Until next time, rest well, take care of yourselves, and remember, sometimes the greatest heroes are not the ones who finish the story themselves. They are the ones who teach someone else how to carry it forward.